Welcome and good morning to the CALS Comm workshop for September 2021. We today will have a enlightening presentation by Alice Touchette. She will handle how to make the best out of an interviewer. And Alice has been has 15 years of strategic communication and marketing experience. First for the National Geographic Society and then higher education. Alice brings her love for people and their stories to her writing projects, including freelance for Our State Magazine and other tourism publications. Currently, she's a marketing writer for CALS Communications. Thank you so much, Alice, for joining us today. And if anyone has questions as Alice is presenting, please feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll address them as we can. Take it away, Alice.
All right. Good morning, everybody. As Janine said, I'm Alice Touchette. I've been in higher ed for over a decade, and during that time, I've conducted lots and lots of interviews for various reasons and for various publications, for newsletters, magazine features, profiles, news stories, and so forth. So today, I'm just going to kind of talk about a few tips that I've kind of gleaned through the years that kind of make an interview successful. So we'll get going if I can make my presentation work. So just a couple of things to get us started. Why we're interviewing, it's like we want to do it to really get information from the person that we're interviewing. They know something that we don't. It's going to make the story kind of shine. Part of that is we really want to bring authenticity to a story or article. You or I can sit here and think of a great story idea. But until we have kind of that first person perspective on the how and why of that story that we're writing, it's not going to kind of connect with our audience as much as we want to. So that's really why we want to do interviews. Just a couple of things for interview basics. You really want to do your research before you go into it. You want to think about what you need and want to know for the story. You're going to write a list of questions. I always record the interview. I use voice memos, like I have it on my cell phone, or I bring an iPad sometimes to do it on there. And that's really just so that I can be very present during the interview and listen. It's difficult when you're trying to take notes and listen at the same time, because that means you're kind of getting yourself out of the interview. And then another kind of basic thing is you can consider using a transcription service like rev.com if you don't have time to re-listen to the interview and take notes. All they really do is take the recording and then give you this really pretty transcript of it. I like it, but sometimes I do actually want to re-listen because it helps me remember the tone of what that person was saying at the time. But really the basics of an interview, it's all about what do you need to know? And that's really what you should be thinking about before you're going into it. So part of that, sorry, my mouse is being ridiculous. Here we go. Is really doing your homework before you go into the interview. At the very least, you should be doing a Google search on this person. Nothing kind of puts an interviewee off more than you asking them a question you could have known just by doing a simple search and to know where they went to school and what they're kind of about. If it's a faculty or staff member, you really want to read their people page and kind of get a sense for how long they've been at the university, the kind of research that they're doing. And then if you can, read an excerpt about something they published, find out something about them that's interesting or that you're curious about. I've even gone so far as to dig into their social media, just to kind of see who they are, get a sense of their face and what they're kind of interested in. And all of this is really just about making it so that when you get into the interview, you know a little bit about them so that you're at ease asking them questions. And then after this, you want to write your questions out before you go into the interview. I always start by just bulleting it out, like an outline of basic things you want to know from the person that you're interviewing. It's just a way to organize your own thoughts before you go in. And then you can draft out full-on questions if you want to. And you do want to show them that you've done your research and that you're looking to learn more about something specific. And then sometimes I'll go back and I'll order those questions as I think that they're going to flow, kind of like you're having a conversation. And we'll get to this in a second, but, the questions are really just an outline. Sometimes you may not even ask them all. They're just kind of a way for you to be like, this is what I want. This is where I think the story is going to go. And this is what I want the person to talk to me about. Because the real goal of the interview is to connect with the person that you're interviewing with and find out what the story is. The interview is all about connecting with them and putting that person at ease so that they are going to tell you what you want to know. So you're connecting to find out why whatever it is important to them, what is cool and unique about it, and why it matters in a broader sense. That is like those three things that you're trying to find out are what are going to make a great impact story. And those are things that you will not necessarily know before you go into the interview as well. So, putting them at ease, it kind of starts with what even the interview invitation. A lot of times for us at the university, that's over an email, right? So I'm emailing them and I'm saying, hi, I'm Alice Touchette. I work with CALS Communications. For example, this week I was interviewing, setting up an interview to talk to somebody about this planned giving campaign that we're working on. And so I said, I'm working with, the advancements office on this planned giving campaign. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate. And then I gave them a couple of questions. I was like, I really want to know, I want to talk to you so I know why you want to give and why is the university so important to you? Do you have time for me this week? So it's really just like an invitation to come over, and it's making it work for their schedule so that they feel like in control of the interview and they know what they're going to talk about. So they're kind of prepared. Because the last thing you want is somebody coming into an interview unprepared to answer questions about what you want to know. That never really goes that well. And so then once you're like in the interview, it's like, you just really want to be polite. It's like, you're talking to a friend. It's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for making time for me today. As I said in my email, here's what we're going to talk about today. Also, I want to let you know I'm recording this interview. And that's just so that I have a chance to listen to you and I'm not constantly taking notes the whole time. And then this is a big one. The very last thing about kind of putting them at ease is like, and this is NC State, at least in our department, it's like our policy is like, you are going to let the interviewee know that they're going to have a chance to review the article before it's published. And that's just practice so that it's like, A, it's for fact checking, and B, it's like to kind of put anybody who's never been interviewed before at ease to be like, okay, this isn't the very end, the last, I want to have a chance to like edit myself later if I need to. Rarely do people make major edits, but I think it's just part of like putting them at ease. So, am I moving too fast, guys? Sorry. I know we have a limited amount of time. And my mouse, I'm sorry. I think my battery is dead on my mouse. Sorry about that. So then when you're going into it, just remember everyone has a story to tell. It's just your job to get them to tell it. I saw like when you guys filled out the form about coming, about how do you get people to stay on track if they're rambling and everything else. And that's one of the hardest parts of there, but just remember there's a story in there somewhere. And even the most reluctant of interviewees has something to say and something that they're passionate about. Your job as an interviewer is really just to make them comfortable enough that they're going to tell you. So I think, the biggest.
Do you think that if they are rambling, that almost gives you a chance to let them feel more comfortable before kind of diving into like more of the questions that you really want answered? Do you think that there's a benefit to some of that kind of like scattered talking?
100%. I think, that is usually where I'm feeling them out for what they're comfortable talking about. And then like, I'm making some sort of personal connection with them. Cause I really do look at it like, and because I just enjoy talking to people, it's like I'm, the other day I was doing an interview for this professor who's a expert in cucumbers and watermelons, right? And like, I don't know much about that, but then like I was talking to him a little bit about it, and then his wife hops on the call to talk about their backyard garden, right? And I'm not there to learn about their backyard garden, but I probably talked to them about their garden for 20 minutes. And I think it was really just, and it ended up applying to the story like later on. But, it's like they were telling me all of it because, in Raleigh, I don't know if you guys are like this, I have so much shade, I can't grow anything in the red dirt. You know what I mean? So I was just very curious about that whole thing. But it was a way for them to connect with me on something that they are passionate about and to know that I was really listening and interested in what they had to say. And then it ended up being that by the end of the story, I was calling him to figure out why it was part of this plan giving campaign I mentioned, why he was giving, a designated gift in his will to the university. And it turns out it's because horticulture is so important to him and his wife, and they grow their own vegetables and eat them. And they want to make sure that students continue to study horticulture after they're gone. And they want to make it easy for those students to do that. So the garden was like my way into understanding why they were passionate about that. So absolutely, like going off script is important. And I do think, if it is like something that's such a ridiculous tangent that you just can't, you're like, oh, wow, this has nothing to do with what I want to know. There are ways to get them back on board. One of the ways that I use it, and I think it's just, my, Southern upbringing or whatever. It's like, oh my goodness, I apologize. I know that you have limited time. Let me get back to this. And like, I just have a couple more questions before we go. And so that's how I kind of segue back into, it's like you're talking to your aunt who's telling you about something that you don't really want to listen to. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's how I kind of segue to get them back to things that I absolutely have to know before then. So again, this is all like about this. We're all talking about it. It's about listening and figuring out what you want to get. It's like, don't get tied to that list of questions. You can skip around and go where the conversation leads you. I think I just told an example of that. And then if you're going too far off track, absolutely gently lead them back to where you want to go. But tangents are really okay. They sometimes lead to the heart of the story. And if you are finding it interesting, likely your audience will find it interesting too. It's like, do you really like, again, it's like, why do we care that a professor is giving like this impact story about giving money to the university? It's like, well, we care because it meant something to him. And also because it's going to mean something to the students he's leaving it to. So this is, again, we just kind of talked about this going off script. And it's all about finding something that's going to bring that story to life. I'll tell another example. I was talking to a professor a few weeks ago. She's in the food science department. And I was supposed to be talking to her about her research, which is all about studying peanut feed for chickens. And she mentioned she got interested in nutrition because she used to do pageants when she was younger. And so I was like, pageants, and like, a bell went off in my head. And I was like, a PhD chemist who's a former pageant queen. I was like, that is exciting. And that is interesting. Right. And so I talked to her again for probably 10 to 15 minutes about her pageant life, growing up and doing that. I was like, how did you even get into chemistry? She's like, and then so we get into this whole discussion about how she's like, you're not just one thing. Just because you like pageants doesn't mean that you're dumb. It doesn't mean whatever. She's like, and that's really what I want my students to know. And so, and then like the whole thing about being in pageants is what led her to nutrition, because she was constantly, trying to look her best for these pageants. And then, if anybody else grew up in the 90s, that there was not a lot of information about nutrition. And so we started talking about that, which led her down this whole path. And then it leads back to her research. But, this whole thing that we were talking about pageants is like, did it have to do with peanut research? Not really, but it was, it made for a better story for her faculty profile. So that's an example of like going off script and why that's an important thing to do. So a few sample interview questions, and I got a couple of these from another writer in our group. If something's like a really heady thing that I don't understand, or, something very scientific that's a little out of my league, you can tell them, how do you explain what you do to your friends and family who don't work in the industry? And that kind of gives them a chance to kind of break it down and put it in layman's terms. And especially if you're writing a process story about kind of how research is done or how something is being made, that's a really good question to ask so that you can kind of get a basic understanding of how it works. Another good one, this is just like, faculty pretty much always want to talk about this. What's your favorite part about working with students? And then like, what made you want to get into this kind of work? These are the kind of questions that are kind of eliciting, not just like what you do, but why you do it. And those are usually better quotes. Another thing for impact, it's like, how has this changed your community, or how has this made a difference? You know, and that kind of inspiration stuff that's kind of in there too. Closing. So it's like, again, it's with like being polite in the interview. It's like, I always end with this question, and I will tell you that 90% of the time, this is where I get the quote that I use in the article. I always end with like, you know, thanks again for your time. Is there anything I haven't specifically asked about today that you would want people either to know about you or your work? And at this point in the interview, like it's towards the end, they've had time to think about it, and they are able to organize their thoughts in a way where they are going to give you the information that you want. And they're going to give it to you in a tighter package than in the earlier part of the interview where they're kind of rambling and going around. So I really, really recommend ending with that question. And that's what I have for you guys today. Are there any questions? I know I went through everything kind of fast, but like, you know, interviews really are just conversations, and like that are, I think the more authentic and connected that you are, the more interested you are in the person that you're interviewing, the better that it will go, and the better story that you're going to make. And that's, I mean, it's very simple, but that's what makes for good stories. Let me see.
So Alice, a thing that I've, you know, sometimes even before you get to the interview, when somebody's either delaying in scheduling, or they seem like they're very concerned about what you are talking to them about, or they've had bad experiences in the past. I feel like with a lot of faculty members that have been around for a long time, they are resisting because they think you're trying to like gotcha or dupe them or something. Like if you kind of know either that somebody is very reluctant to speak with you, or that they are anxious about what you're going to be doing with this information, how do you kind of put them at ease in that way?
Yeah, so this is very common that happens, especially with like also, you know, we work a lot with commodity groups and some other people like that. I think one of the things that I do, and it's like I'm hesitant to say it, but it's because I don't really recommend it, because I feel like you get so much more from a conversation. But one of the things I'll do for people, if they're really reluctant and they keep blowing off the actual in-person interview, is to offer to do it over email, and I'll send them a list of questions and let them answer on their own time. And sometimes that's the only way to get the quote. But that lets them, the reason I don't enjoy that is that you get these really canned answers. But sometimes that's the only way to do it. But that's one method I'll use, like, and, you know, just because we all, you know, have to move on at some point. The other thing that I'll do is like, really, really harp on if I can tell someone's reluctant, again, at the beginning, it's like, you are going to have a chance to see this. Anything that I write, you are going to be able to see, and you're going to approve. So if we're getting it, if it's a little off, and I'll say this to them as like, if it's a little off, I appreciate you correcting it. And so I'm going to work with you until we get it right. And I think that's just like the idea that they have some control over it after it's done, gives them a little bit of ease. And like I said, it's very rare that it comes back, you know, with any kind of significant edit on it. But I think it's just the idea that it's like, we're in this together. You know, this isn't a news article necessarily. It's not like the same as like a journalism piece. It's like we're working for a communications piece for the university. We want it to look good. Like we want to tell a good story. So I think that helps a lot. And that's kind of specific to what we do at NC State anyway. It's like, we're never trying to make anybody look bad, you know? So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And we have a couple of questions that came into the chat. One from Megan Halbaum. Am I butchering your last name, Megan? Possibly. Alice, a lot of us on the call today work with FNEP, and we don't typically conduct formal interviews. Do you have any advice on how to get a story from casual conversations during informal meetings over a series of meetings?
Yeah, I think, you know, in that casual conversation, if you're hearing a story in that casual conversation that you want to use in an impact story, I would definitely like get their contact information. And then like, if you're going to use it, like I just said, like email it to them and be like, you know, I'd love to attribute this quote to you, or to talk about, you know, the anecdotal story that you told me the other day, and just make sure that they're approving it before you publish it. But absolutely, like a lot of the ideas for these great stories come from those initial casual conversations. You know, it's like I heard that, I think that's a really authentic way to get the story. And it's just about the follow-up and handling the follow-up in a way that you're able to take that story and you get permission to use it.
And then a question about from Rebecca Benton, will you give suggestions on how we can use these interview techniques to spice up our success stories?
I'll tell you, like my kind of favorite trick of the trade, if you have somebody who's got a clear personality and a clear tone in their answers to you, let them do the majority of the heavy lifting on the storytelling and put it in quotes. So if you're going to spice up the success story, it's like you're leading with that person. You know, you're giving it a context, but then you're leading with what that person is saying about it. Does that make sense? It's like, so instead of like, you know, us telling the story, you're having the person in the quotes be like, this is why this was so amazing. This is how I did it. And like the main story is being told through their voice.
And then I guess, you know, when you have an interview with someone and there are some like very clear places within the interview that you're like, oh, this is like gold for the article. Do you usually try to frame the article to highlight those, or is it kind of you still, you know, have in mind where you want to cover and then just put those in?
So I'll be honest, it depends on the story. It's like, it's a little bit different. Sometimes if I get those golden quotes and I know that that's the main thing, it's like that absolutely influences the way the entire article is organized. Other times, like for a less, I mean, I don't want to, you know, a piece that's like you're going to write and you need the quote from the person to be like, this was why this was so amazing. Do you know what I mean? Like that one, I'm just dropping it in. It's usually for those kind of stories, I've already written why it's important and I just need like the quote to augment it, right? But if you're getting, like I said, like a person who's telling the story in a way that's less institutional, less whatever, and if that's appropriate for that story, then absolutely you're leading with that and you're putting the kind of institutional stuff down towards the bottom. So, because I think that's what makes people engage, is like when they hear an authentic voice and they hear somebody else besides us say why it's important and why it worked.
Any other questions? I think everybody says you're supposed to wait 11 seconds after you ask a question before assuming that people are not going to answer a question, but I'm not sure if that applies for Zoom or not. So thanks so much, Alice, for your time today. I think the information you supplied is very targeted and helpful. For everybody who has attended CALSCOM workshops in the past, next month we have a CALSCOM workshop where we are going to be talking with 4 or 5 faculty members who have excellent media relations skills. That includes Rob Dunn, Lindsay Hayes Maslow, Ben Chapman, a faculty member from CHAS and BTech. So that will be on October 21st at 10 a.m. And I hope you all can join us then. And thanks again to Alice.
All right, bye guys. Thanks for coming.